I admit I'm a space cadet. I've been a space cadet since I was 4 years old. That was the year that I watched Gemini 4 and Ed White do the first spacewalk by an American astronaut. That was 1965.
Just had word from Houston. We're ready to have you get out whenever you're ready.
When I share my story with my students today, they ask me, "My God, how old are you?" And I smile and I say, "I'm so old, I know the first names of all the dinosaurs." And of course they giggle. I'm not going to admit to them that I'm 60 years old now and still very much a boy at heart. But I am so excited about what's happening now in space programs around the world.
Okay, I'm separating from the spacecraft.
Okay, separate from the spacecraft at this time, all right.
Okay, my feet are out.
Okay, your feet are out.
I think I'm dragging a little bit, so I don't want to fire the gun yet. Okay, I'm out.
I remember quite clearly sitting in front of my parents' black and white Philips television set as people like Walter Cronkite and a whole bunch of astronauts described the importance of Gemini 4 and what Ed White was doing. It was the beginning of a lifetime of love and interest in space matters, not just American, but Soviet, and now today, of course, the much bigger and sweeping efforts that different nations and consortiums are doing to make humans a spacefaring society.
Okay, now, close three.
Okay, I put a little roll in, took it right out. Am I in your view, Jimbo?
Well, you know, I can't see it on the screen.
Don't sweat it, I'll come over to you.
Let's put those as well, now we just let it go.
All right. Okay, I rolled off, and I'm rolling to the right now. Under my own influence. There goes a... Looks like a thermal glove, Jim.
It is, Ed.
All right. Now I've come above the spacecraft.
Now later that day I decided to have a bit of fun. I wanted to go on my own spacewalk. So I figured out how to turn the dryer on in our home using the low setting. There's no heat coming out. And I got a suction cup and stuck it on the inside of the door. It was a front loader, so that I could close the door, and the moment the door was closed, the dryer would start to operate, and there I was inside my own spaceship going kertunk, kertunk, kertunk. Now my mother came and turned it off, and when she left the room I turned it back on, and it was the third time she came in that she figured, she better look inside, and there I was giggling, a 4-year-old. My mother thought, "You're crazy, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm going out into space in my own spaceship." Oh, of course I was not allowed into the utility room for the rest of that day and the day after that and the rest of the week. But if you look closely at the top of my head, I think I still have some of the bumps from my adventure as a 4-year-old space cadet.
Under my own control. Okay, I'm coming over.
It looks beautiful.
I feel like $1 million. I'm coming back to you. The gun works real good, Jim.
Let me get over here where I can see.
Yeah. Well, I got me upside down.
Make that flag look pretty.
Yep. Okay, I'm right by the stub antenna now.
Okay. Let me get some notes for you there. I already get some tremendous pictures of you. Let me try to give us a hot.
Okay, I think I've exhausted my air now.
Stay right there.
I had very good control with it. I just needed more air.
Okay, stand by. Let me take a couple pictures, folks.
All right.
Tell me what you think.
That's right. Capcom, it's very easy to maneuver. This is the greatest experience. It's just tremendous. Right now, I'm standing on my head, and I'm looking right down. It looks like we're coming up on the coast of California. As I go in a slow rotation to the right. There's absolutely no disorientation associated with it.
One thing about it, when it gets out there and starts wiggling around, it sure makes the spacecraft tough to control.
Later that day, after dinner, and when the sun went down, it was summertime, so it was a bit late, I snuck out of the house into the back and lay down on the ground and looked up into space, hoping to see the Gemini 4 spacecraft come flying over. And I watched and I looked and I looked and I watched. I saw some things come over, but I knew that they weren't the Gemini spacecraft because they were going north-south, and I even saw a few shooting stars, but I did not see Gemini 4. Supposedly, the following morning, my parents found me asleep on the back lawn. What were you doing outside? I said, I was looking for Gemini 4. My mother was not amused. My father was. My father was in the Royal Canadian Air Force at the time. And turned to my mother and said, look at that, my son. What did he say? A chip off the old block? And my mother said, blockhead.
Okay, I'm drifting down underneath the spacecraft. There's no difficulty with recontacting the spacecraft. It's all very soft. Particularly as long as you move nice and slow. I feel very thankful to have the experience to be doing this. I'll bring myself in and put myself out into your future.
Is he taking pictures?
Okay, you want me to maneuver for you now, Ed?
No, I think you're doing fine. What I'd like to do is get all the way out here and get a picture of the whole spacecraft. I don't seem to be doing that.
Yeah, I noticed that. You can't seem to get far enough away.
No.
I was a bit of a handful when I was a little boy. Being precocious, I was born premature. I have a rather high IQ, but I won't tell you what it is. You'll have to guess. For instance, I used to go up onto the swings and see how high I could swing. Higher and higher and higher. And, of course, I correlated the relationship between the speed and the fact there was additional force on me. And this is all when I'm like 4 or 5 years old. And, of course, the other thing I used to do is I used to climb everything. Trees, fences. I even once climbed onto the roof of our house. And when it came time to come down, I fell down, kerchunk, fall right onto the ground. It was good, it was the soft grass. When I regained consciousness, my mother was looking over me and saying, what mischief were you up to today? Many years later, when it became obvious to her I was very good at math and physics, for instance, I can lecture you on Einstein's theory of general relativity, she reached her own conclusion that the reason I'm so good at math and physics is because I fell on my head a few times when I was growing up. I think my mother's right.
Okay, I will let myself go out now.
Gemini 4, Houston.
You know, Ed, the thing about the reference we were talking about looks like it's your right.
I don't even need one.
Gemini 4, Houston, Capcom.
Gus, this is Jim. Got any message for us?
The flight director says get back in.
Okay.
One. Where are we over now, Jim?
I don't know. We're coming over the west there, and they want you to come back in now.
Back in?
Back in.
Roger, we've been trying to talk to you for a while here.
Coming in.
You got about 4 minutes till Bermuda LOS.
I remember as an 8-year-old getting into trouble with my parents because on the night that Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, I was so excited I bounced on my parents' bed and broke a spring on my father's side of the bed. He was not amused. But there we were as a family sitting around, again, a black and white television, the Philips, watching Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin step onto the moon. Now that was a long time ago. Today I have the pleasure of teaching young kids, middle school and even elementary school, about space science. And so you'll see behind me, for instance, a lecture I gave yesterday about the tide and what causes the tides between the Earth and the Moon. And part of the fun I have today is to teach an entirely new generation of children about what space science is all about and about the importance of humanity becoming a spacefaring civilization.